Alright, Contra, now we're talking. This is a long-running series of side-scrolling shoot-'em-up games from Konami. These are some of the best examples of macho badass action, while also providing a very challenging game on top of that. So, for this series of videos, I will be talking about Contra, Super Contra, Contra 3 The Alien Wars, Contra Force, and Contra Hardcores. Now, I won't be able to get into the portable ones or the later installments as I don't have access to them, but let's get started with the first Contra game. Now, the first Contra was released in 1987 as an arcade game, but was later ported to the Nintendo a year later. Now, I never grew up in the 80s and I never owned an NES, but regardless, this is a fun game, even by today's standards. The premise is simple. A Rambo lookalike and someone who looks like a cross between Arnold Schwarzenegger and John McClane from Die Hard are off to stop an alien force called Red Falcon from taking over the world. You go through each stage of the game blasting everything in sight. The shooting feels very satisfying when you're taking out enemies or objects with glorious 8-bit sound effects. You can shoot in any direction you want and while jumping, which is very useful when trying to get enemies at a certain angle. You start off with a simple pea shooter where you have to tap the button as much as possible, but as you're going through the stage, you'll gain power-ups for your guns, with one where you can just hold down the button to fire, a flamethrower where you shoot fireballs across the screen, and probably the most useful, the spread gun, where you can clear a whole area within a wide radius. Each weapon power-up has its advantages and disadvantages, and can be very useful for certain enemies or areas. The enemy types range from your standard grunts that attack in a couple different ways to automated turrets. Later on, you'll face against the aliens that resemble the xenomorphs from the Alien movies. There are also some boss battles that you usually fight at the end of a stage, and each boss is different from the last and attack differently. Most of the attacks come from many different directions, requiring you to multitask on which enemy to shoot. The game can get incredibly hard at times, and this is probably the only criticism I have with this game, is that at times it can be a little relentless about the many enemies it throws at you. Whenever you're trying to dodge some bullets, you only get hit by something else, and sometimes it's almost unavoidable. On stage 6 there are some fire hazard obstacles that you're trying to get past. The later ones you can time the jumps on them by noticing the pattern. However, there are a couple that will pretty much kill you anytime you try to jump over. It seemed like the only way to get past them is to have that post-death invincibility to go through. Also, before the final stage, you have to blast a circle on the wall several times, but you are getting showered with grenades and foot soldiers that run towards you, and unavoidably, you're going to get hit a few times. This is definitely one of the best side-scrolling shooters I've played, and while there are a few frustrating moments at times, they're frustrating enough that you still want to keep playing. I give this game a 9 out of 10. Super Contra, or Super C as many would call it, was released in North America about 2 years after the first one. It bears the same satisfying style of gameplay from the first one with a few minor changes. Probably the biggest is that in some stages you play in a bird's eye view, and while it doesn't change the gameplay much, it gives a nice sense of variety to the stages, much like the semi-3D perspective stage from the first game. There's also changes to the way some power-ups work, with the flamethrower shooting a big fireball that multiplies, rather than having the fireballs go in circles. Not much else to say about Super Contra, but it's another great Contra game. I also give this game a 9 out of 10. Stay tuned for the next video where I will talk about Contra 3 The Alien Wars.